My name is Ariana, 32 years old, and I work as a kindergarten teacher in Chicago. All my life, I dreamed of having children and building my own family. After dating James for 5 years, we decided to get married and start trying for a baby. When we shared our plans with my family, I was completely blindsided by their reaction. They actually declared that I wasn't allowed to have children without their permission. Before I tell you how my own family tried to control my womb, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. This story changed my life, and I hope sharing it helps someone else stand up for their choices. I come from what most would call a traditional family where parents and grandparents have always had a strong say in major decisions. My father, Frank, is what you might call old school. He runs our family like a small dictatorship where his word is final, and questioning his authority is seen as disrespect. Growing up, we all learned quickly that disagreeing with Dad meant facing his disapproval, which could last for weeks. My mother, Diana, is the complete opposite. She is gentle and kind, but years of marriage to my father have made her submissive. She rarely voices her own opinions, especially if they differ from his. Instead, she has become the peacemaker, the one who smooths things over when Dad gets upset. I remember countless times when she would come to my room after a fight with Dad, telling me, "Sometimes we need to bend a little to keep the family together." Looking back, I realize how much she had bent until she nearly broke. My older sister Stephanie lives just 10 minutes from our parents with her husband and 3 children. Their life is deeply intertwined with our parents. Mom and Dad help with childcare, provide financial assistance, and are involved in every decision Stephanie and her husband make. In return, Stephanie never challenges Dad and follows his advice without question. I always thought she was happy with this arrangement, but now I wonder if she had any choice. My younger sister Natalie still lives with our parents at 29. She has never moved out, never challenged Dad, and seems content to live under his rules. She works at his company and spends most of her free time with Mom and Dad. The perfect daughter in my father's eyes. Then there is me, the middle child, always a bit different from the rest. I moved out at 22, got my teaching degree, and built a life separate from my family. While I remained close to them, I valued my independence. Perhaps this is why what happened shocked me so deeply. I met James 5 years ago when he joined our elementary school as the new physical education teacher. We started as colleagues who occasionally chatted in the teacher's lounge. He was different from the men in my family. Quiet, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. When he asked me about my day, he actually listened to my answer. Our friendship grew naturally over shared lunches and staff events. I found myself looking forward to seeing him, to sharing stories about my kindergartners, or discussing books we had both read. After 6 months, he asked me on a proper date, and I said yes, without hesitation. What I loved most about James was how he encouraged me to make my own choices. When I talked about wanting to get my master's in early childhood education, he helped me research programs. When I complained about my father questioning my career path, James reminded me that I was living my life, not his. For someone who grew up in a family where one person made all the decisions, having a partner who valued my thoughts was revolutionary. From early in our relationship, we talked about wanting children. Both of us loved working with kids, and we often imagined what our own family might look like. We agreed on wanting 2 or 3 children, discussed parenting philosophies, and even joked about which of our traits we hoped our kids would inherit. As our relationship became more serious, we started planning for our future together. We saved for a house, setting aside money each month. We researched school districts and neighborhoods that would be good for raising children. I even started taking prenatal vitamins a year before we planned to try wanting to give our future children the healthiest start possible. When James proposed on our 4th anniversary during a picnic at the lakefront, I was overjoyed. He had planned it perfectly, a beautiful spring day, our favorite spot with a view of the skyline and a simple but heartfelt proposal. I called my parents immediately, excited to share our happiness. My family seemed thrilled about the engagement. Mom cried happy tears. Dad shook James' hand firmly, and my sister started talking about wedding plans right away. The trouble only began when we mentioned wanting to start trying for a baby soon after the wedding. I still remember the sudden silence that fell over the room. Dad cleared his throat. Mom looked down at her hands, and Stephanie exchanged a strange look with our father. At the time, I brushed it off as surprise at our eagerness to start a family. If only I had recognized it as the warning sign it was. The real trouble started 2 weeks after our engagement, when James and I were invited to dinner at my parents' house. Mom had prepared all my favorite dishes, and there was an expensive bottle of wine on the table, signs that this was meant to be a special occasion. Looking back, I realized they had planned the entire evening carefully. The first hour passed pleasantly enough. We discussed wedding venues and dates, looked at some of Mom's old photo albums, and enjoyed the food. James charmed my mother with compliments on her cooking, and made my father laugh with stories about the mishaps during his first year of teaching. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, as Mom served dessert, Dad cleared his throat and said, "Now that we have had some time to think about your engagement and your plans, there is something important we need to discuss as a family." The sudden formality in his voice made my stomach tighten. James reached for my hand under the table, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Mom became very busy with the coffee cups, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "Ariana," my father continued, "in our family, major life decisions are not made individually. They are made collectively with the wisdom and input of the entire family, especially the elders." I laughed nervously, not fully understanding what he was getting at. "Dad, we have already decided on a June wedding. If you think that's too soon, we can push it back a bit." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not talking about the wedding date. I'm talking about your plans to have children immediately after." The room fell silent. I could feel James tense beside me. "What about our plans?" I asked carefully. "The decision to bring a child into this world is not yours alone to make," Dad said firmly. "It affects the entire family. As such, it requires family approval and proper timing." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you saying we need your permission to have a baby?" "That is exactly what I'm saying," he replied without hesitation. "Children are a responsibility of the entire bloodline, not just of the parents. This has always been our family's way." I turned to my mother, expecting her to say something to tell Dad he was being ridiculous. But she kept her eyes down, focusing intently on stirring her untouched coffee. Stephanie, who had been invited to dinner without her husband and children, suddenly spoke up. "Ariana, it's not as strange as it sounds. Before Thomas and I had each of our children, we consulted with Mom and Dad and made sure the timing was right for everyone." "Right for everyone?" James finally spoke, his voice controlled but tight. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand how our decision to have children concerns anyone but us." My father turned his attention to James. "Young man, when you marry into this family, you accept our traditions and our ways. Children require support from the entire family. Grandparents help raise them, uncles and aunts contribute to their upbringing. Therefore, the entire family has a say in when they arrive." I felt like I had entered some bizarre alternate reality. "Dad, while we would appreciate any help you want to give, James and I will be raising our children. We don't expect you to take on that responsibility." "Don't be naive, Ariana," my father scoffed. "Do you really think you can manage parenthood without our help? Look at your sister. She has our support every day with her 3 children." Stephanie nodded eagerly. "They watch the kids 3 days a week so I can work part-time. Dad helped with the down payment on our house. Mom cooks for us twice a week. I couldn't do it without them." "And we are happy to do the same for you," my mother finally spoke. "But there needs to be proper planning. Your father and I have our own schedule and commitments. The conversation spiraled from there, with my family listing all the reasons why now was not the right time for us to have children. "The house you bought is too small for a baby," Dad said, though he had never even seen our 3-bedroom home. "Your grandmother isn't in good health right now. Adding the stress of a new grandchild would be too much for her," Mom added, referring to my father's mother, who lived in Florida and whom we saw once a year at most. "Stephanie needs our help with her children. We can't divide our resources further right now," Dad explained, as if family support was a finite resource that could be depleted. "James hasn't proven himself as a provider yet," was perhaps the most insulting reason. James had been teaching for 8 years and had recently been promoted to athletic director. As the list of objections grew, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. James maintained his composure, but I could see the muscles in his jaw tightening. This was supposed to be a happy time in our lives, and instead, it was turning into a nightmare. "With all due respect," James finally said, "Ariana and I are adults with stable jobs, a home, and a solid relationship. We appreciate your concern, but the decision about when to start our family belongs to us." My father's face darkened. "That is not how this family operates." I stood up, unable to take any more. Well, maybe it's time this family operated differently. The drive home that night was quiet. James tried to reassure me that my family would come around, that they were just surprised and would adjust to the idea. I wanted to believe him, but I knew my father. Once he made up his mind, changing it was nearly impossible. "Maybe we should wait a bit," James suggested gently. "Give them time to get used to us being married first." The fact that even James, my supporter and advocate, was considering giving in to my family's demands made me realize how serious the situation was. That night, I had my first nightmare about being trapped in a room screaming that it was my body and my choice, while faceless figures stood around me shaking their heads in disapproval. The days following that disastrous dinner, my family launched what I can only describe as a full-scale campaign to control my reproductive choices. My mother began calling me daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Her approach was gentler than my father's, but no less manipulative. "Sweetheart, I just want what's best for you," she would say. "Having children is so much harder than you realize. You need your family to help you through it." When I pointed out that many women have children without their parents dictating, when she would sigh deeply. "Those poor women struggle so much. I don't want that for you, Ariana." Stephanie took a different approach. She bombarded me with text messages detailing the difficulties of motherhood, each one emphasizing how she couldn't have survived without our parents' help. "Was up all night with Tommy's ear infection. Thank God Mom came over at 6 a.m. so I could sleep. You don't want to do this without their support, trust me. Dad just paid for Emma's braces. Do you and James have $12,000 lying around for orthodontics? Think about it." These messages always ended with some version of, "Just follow Dad's advice. It's easier that way." Meanwhile, Natalie, my younger sister, suddenly became distant. When I called her to get her perspective, she was evasive. "You know how Dad is, Ari. Why are you making this into such a big deal? Just do what he's asking." When I pressed her, asking if she really thought it was normal for a father to dictate when his adult daughter could have children, she grew defensive. "You're being disrespectful. Dad only wants what's best for the family." The most disturbing development was when extended family members began to contact me. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I rarely spoke to started calling and messaging, all with the same theme: I needed to respect my father's wishes. "Your father called me very concerned," my Aunt Patricia said during an unexpected phone call. "He says you're refusing to follow family traditions. Is that true, Ariana?" It became clear that my father was spreading his version of events throughout the family, painting James and me as rebellious and disrespectful. The tactics became more manipulative as time went on. My father threatened to withhold financial support, though I hadn't relied on him financially since college. "Your wedding is expensive," he reminded me. "If you insist on defying family traditions, perhaps we need to reconsider our contribution." My mother employed emotional manipulation, tearfully telling me how my actions were breaking her heart and tearing the family apart. She would call me crying, saying, "I don't understand why you want to hurt us this way." Stephanie went further, spreading subtle misinformation about James to the family. "I heard from a friend's cousin who works at James' school that he's not well liked there," she told our mother, who promptly relayed this information to me. "Are you sure he's stable enough to be a father?" The most absurd moment came when my parents invited a family friend who was a pediatrician to dinner with us. Throughout the meal, he kept steering the conversation toward the crisis of unprepared parenting and the vital role of grandparents in child development. It was so obviously orchestrated that even James, usually diplomatic, had to excuse himself from the table to avoid saying something he'd regret. All this pressure began to affect my relationship with James. Initially, he was my rock, assuring me that we would get through this together. But as weeks passed and the situation only escalated, I could see him struggling. "Maybe we should postpone the wedding," he suggested one night after another tense phone call with my parents. "Give everyone some time to cool down." "Is that what you want?" I asked, hurt that he would even consider it. "Of course not," he said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "But I hate seeing what this is doing to you. You're not sleeping, you're anxious all the time. I just want us to be happy." "So you think giving in to their demands will make me happy?" I countered. "No, but fighting them is clearly making you miserable," he shot back. The argument escalated from there, our first serious fight in years. We were both stressed and exhausted from the constant barrage of family interference. What should have been one of the happiest periods of our lives, planning our wedding and future together, had turned into a nightmare of family politics and control. The stress began to take a physical toll on me. I developed insomnia, often lying awake, replaying conversations and arguments in my head. I lost weight as my appetite diminished. At school, I found myself struggling to focus on my students, my mind constantly drifting to my family situation. James noticed the changes. "Ari, I think you should talk to someone professional," he suggested gently. "This situation is affecting your health." I brushed him off, insisting I could handle it. In reality, I was scared. Scared that a therapist would tell me I was overreacting. Scared they might agree with my family that their behavior was normal. Most of all, I was scared to admit how deeply this situation was hurting me. My dreams of motherhood, once a source of joy and anticipation, began to feel tainted. When I saw pregnant women or parents with newborns, instead of the usual excitement, I felt a complex mix of longing and dread. Was parenthood worth destroying my relationship with my family? Was I being selfish for wanting to make this decision on my own terms? The breaking point came when my father organized what he called a family council to discuss our situation. He invited extended family members from both sides and presented it as a chance to resolve our differences. In reality, it was more like a tribunal. We gathered in my parents' living room, nearly 20 family members crammed into the space. James and I sat on the couch, feeling like defendants awaiting judgment. My father stood at the center of the room, playing the role of both judge and prosecutor. "We are here today to discuss Ariana and James' decision to defy family tradition," he began. "In our family, major life decisions, especially those involving children, are made collectively." Various family members nodded in agreement. I scanned the room, hoping to find at least one sympathetic face, but most avoided my gaze. For the next 2 hours, family members took turns expressing their concerns about our plans to have children without family approval. Some questioned our financial readiness, others our maturity, and still others our understanding of family values. My Uncle Walter, my father's older brother, was particularly harsh. "In my day, young people respected their elders' wisdom. This generation thinks they know everything." My cousin Maria, who had delayed having children until her parents deemed it appropriate, shared her experience. "I waited until Mom and Dad felt the timing was right, and I'm grateful for their wisdom." My children came at the perfect time for everyone. Throughout this ordeal, James sat beside me, his hand firmly holding mine. He remained respectfully silent until my father's friend Harold suggested that James might not be suitable father material due to his disrespect for family traditions. At that point, James finally stood up. "I've listened to everyone speak about family traditions and respect," he said, his voice steady but firm. "But not once has anyone mentioned love or choice, or the fact that Ariana and I are grown adults capable of making our own decisions." The room fell silent as James continued. "I respect all of you and the importance of family, but respect should go both ways. The decision about when to have children belongs to Ariana and me. We would love your support, but we do not need your permission." My father's face turned red with anger. "Young man, you clearly don't understand how this family works." "Maybe not," James replied. "But I understand how a healthy relationship works, and it's not through control and manipulation." We left shortly after amid tight smiles and cold goodbyes. In the car, I broke down in tears of frustration, exhaustion, but also pride in James for standing up for us. "I'm sorry if I made things worse," he said as he drove us home. "You didn't," I assured him. "You said exactly what needed to be said." That night, lying in bed, I realized we had reached a crossroads. Either we would stand firm in our decision, potentially fracturing my family relationships, or we would surrender our autonomy to keep the peace. Neither option felt good, but only one felt right. I never imagined my own family could inflict so much pain. But the most devastating blow came when I accidentally discovered a family secret that put everything into perspective. It happened during a rare moment alone with my mother. Dad was on a fishing trip with his brothers, giving Mom a brief respite from his controlling presence. I had stopped by to pick up some old photo albums for wedding planning. As we sat at the kitchen table flipping through pictures, Mom seemed unusually relaxed. We laughed over old fashion choices and reminisced about family vacations. Then I noticed something odd, a gap in the family photos from when I was about 5. "Mom, where are the pictures from that year?" I asked casually. She stiffened slightly. "Oh, I must have organized them in a different album." But her reaction sparked my curiosity. Later, while she was answering a phone call, I searched through the other albums in the living room cabinet. Behind them, I found a small, unmarked photo book pushed to the back. Inside were ultrasound images and a few photos of my mother with a small baby bump. The dates showed it was between my birth and Natalie's. I had never known about a pregnancy between us. When Mom returned and saw what I had found, she sank into a chair, her face pale. "You were never supposed to find that," she whispered. The story spilled out of her like a long-held breath finally released. When I was 5, she had become pregnant with what would have been her 3rd child. My father and his parents had decided another child would be too much financial strain and bad timing for the family. They told me I needed to terminate the pregnancy. Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "Your father said we already had 2 healthy daughters, and that was enough. His parents agreed." Her voice broke as she continued. "I wanted that baby so badly, Ariana. But everyone kept telling me I was being selfish, that I wasn't considering what was best for the family. Eventually, I gave in." I sat in stunned silence as the implications of her words sank in. My father and grandparents had made my mother abort a wanted pregnancy because it didn't fit their plans. And now they were trying to control when I could have children. "Does Stephanie know about this?" I asked. Mom nodded slowly. "Stephanie knows everything. Why do you think she's so compliant? She saw what happened to me, how I was treated when I tried to stand up for myself. She vowed never to go through that." This revelation was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I pieced together more of the family's dark history of control. I learned that Stephanie had actually wanted to go to college out of state, but was pressured to stay local and live at home. She had dreams of becoming a veterinarian, but was steered toward accounting because it was more practical and allowed her to work at my father's company. I discovered that this pattern of control stretched back generations. My grandmother had wanted to be a nurse, but was forbidden by her father. My great-aunt had been forced to break off an engagement to a man the family deemed unsuitable. The most chilling revelation came from an offhand comment from my cousin Jennifer, who mentioned that my father had hired a private investigator to look into James's background when we first started dating seriously. "Uncle Frank does it for all the potential spouses," she said, not realizing this was news to me. "He did it for Stephanie's husband too, just making sure they're good enough for his daughters." When I confronted my father about this invasion of privacy, he was unapologetic. "It's my duty to protect this family from unsuitable influences." But his protection had turned into something far darker. The background check on James was just the beginning. As our wedding date approached and we stood firm in our decision to maintain our reproductive autonomy, my father escalated his tactics. James began receiving strange calls at work. Parents suddenly questioned his teaching methods. There were whispers about his character among school staff. It took weeks before we connected these incidents to my father. A friendly administrator at James's school mentioned that she had received a strange call from someone claiming to be a concerned parent questioning James's fitness to work with children. The caller mentioned specific details about James' past that aren't public knowledge, she told us. It felt very personal, not like a genuine concern. James was devastated. "Your father is trying to destroy my career because we won't let him control our reproductive choices," he said in disbelief. The campaign extended to our wedding plans. Vendors we had booked suddenly called to cancel. The venue we loved mysteriously became double booked for our date. Friends who had enthusiastically agreed to be in our wedding party began making excuses about not being able to participate. Each time, we suspected my father's influence, but couldn't prove it. The stress was becoming unbearable. One evening, as we sat amidst scattered wedding plans and unanswered invitations, James made a suggestion that broke my heart. "Maybe we should just elope. Go somewhere far away, get married quietly, and start fresh without all this drama." "Is that what you want?" I asked, my voice small. He took my hand. "What I want is to marry you without your family tearing us apart. What I want is for us to have the freedom to build our family on our terms. What I want is to see you smile again without fear in your eyes." The weight of his words pressed on my chest. This man who had stood by me through every family battle was suggesting we give up our dream wedding just to escape the toxic control of my family. That night, I went to bed early with a pounding headache. In the morning, I woke up with an intense wave of nausea. For a moment, a wild thought crossed my mind. Could I be pregnant, James? And I had been careful, but nothing is 100% effective. I bought a pregnancy test during my lunch break at school, hands shaking as I paid. The 3 minutes waiting for the result were some of the longest of my life. When the single line appeared, negative, I experienced a complex wave of emotions, relief, disappointment, and then a disturbing realization. I was relieved not because I didn't want a baby, but because I was afraid of what my family would do if I were pregnant. That was the moment I understood how deeply damaged my relationship with my family had become. I was afraid of them, afraid of their reaction to what should be one of the happiest moments of my life. When I told James about the pregnancy scare and my reaction to it, he held me as I cried. "This isn't right, Ari," he whispered into my hair. "No one should feel this way about sharing good news with their family." The final blow came during a last-ditch attempt to reason with my parents. I went to their house alone, hoping that without James present, they might be more receptive. Instead, my father delivered an ultimatum. Either you sign this family agreement about postponing children for at least 3 years, or you will no longer be welcome in this house. Furthermore, you will be removed from my will, and all financial assistance for your wedding will be withdrawn. My mother sat beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Ariana," she begged, "don't tear this family apart." When I refused to sign, my sister Stephanie joined the attack. "You've always been the selfish one," she spat. "Always thinking about yourself, never about what's best for the family. You don't deserve to be a mother if this is how you treat your own family." I left my childhood home that day feeling like I was leaving a part of myself behind. As I drove away, James called with news that pushed me to my breaking point. He had been called into the principal's office to discuss concerning reports about his conduct. Though the principal seemed skeptical of the anonymous complaints, the situation was serious enough to merit an investigation. That night, James suggested we cancel the wedding altogether and move to another city. "We can start fresh somewhere else, somewhere your father can't reach us." For the first time, I seriously considered it. My dream of having my family at my wedding, of maintaining connections despite our differences, was crumbling before my eyes. The life I had envisioned, marriage to James with my family's blessing children who would know their grandparents and aunts, seemed impossible now. I went to bed that night feeling utterly defeated. My family had won. They had made the cost of defying them so high that surrender seemed like the only option. I'd love to say there was a dramatic moment when everything changed, when I suddenly found the strength to stand up to my family. But the truth is, my awakening came quietly in the middle of the night, after hours of sleeplessness and tears. I was lying in bed, watching James sleep peacefully beside me, when a simple question formed in my mind. Whose life am I living? For weeks, I had been trapped in a nightmare of my family's making. I had allowed their demands and manipulations to consume me, to make me question my own desires and decisions. But in that quiet moment, I realized something profound. This was my life, not theirs. The next day, I called my old college roommate Lisa, who had gone through a similar situation with her conservative family when she decided to marry outside her faith. We hadn't spoken in months, but she immediately understood my situation. "Ariana, what your family is doing isn't love," she said firmly. "It's control. There's a difference." She recommended a book called Boundaries that had helped her navigate her own family difficulties. I ordered it immediately and devoured it over the weekend. The book explained how healthy families respect individual choices while maintaining loving connections. It described exactly what my family wasn't doing. I began researching family control dynamics and found countless articles and forums filled with stories similar to mine. I wasn't alone, and more importantly, I wasn't wrong to want autonomy. The following Monday, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist Lisa had recommended, Dr. Jensen, who specialized in family dynamics and boundary issues. I was nervous. Talking to a stranger about my family problems felt like a betrayal, but I was desperate for help. Dr. Jensen listened without judgment as I poured out the whole story. When I finished, expecting her to tell me I was overreacting, she said something that changed everything. "What your family is doing is not normal or healthy. It's emotional abuse." Hearing those words, emotional abuse, from a professional was both shocking and validating. I wasn't crazy. My discomfort wasn't an overreaction. My family's behavior was genuinely problematic. Over the next few weeks, I attended therapy sessions twice a week. Dr. Jensen helped me understand the concept of enmeshment, when family members become excessively involved in each other's lives to the point where individual identities are lost. My family wasn't just traditional. They were enmeshed to an unhealthy degree. James joined me for some sessions where we learned strategies for establishing healthy boundaries together. He had been tiptoeing around the issue, worried about coming between me and my family. With Dr. Jensen's guidance, he felt more confident in supporting me without feeling guilty. The most powerful moment in therapy came when Dr. Jensen asked me to imagine my future child facing a similar situation. "What would you want them to do?" she asked. "Would you want them to surrender their autonomy to please others, or would you want them to stand up for themselves?" The answer was clear. I would never want my child to experience the control and manipulation I was enduring. I would want them to be strong to make their own choices, to live authentically. That realization was my turning point. If I couldn't stand up for myself now, how could I ever teach my future children to stand up for themselves? A few days later, I had a profound experience at school. I was watching one of my kindergartners, a little girl named Maya, playing with her mother during pickup time. The love between them was palpable. The mother responsive and attentive, but also allowing Maya space to explore and make small decisions on her own. "She's so independent," I commented to Maya's mom. "You must be proud." She smiled. "That's the goal, isn't it? To raise them to make good choices on their own, not to need us forever." Her words resonated deeply. That was healthy parenting, guiding children toward independence, not controlling them for life. Armed with new understanding and determination, James and I developed a plan. We would not run away or elope, as my family might expect. Instead, we would stand our ground, establish clear boundaries, and proceed with our lives on our terms. The first step was financial independence. Although we were already financially stable, we went through our finances with a fine-tooth comb to ensure there were no ties to my family that could be used against us. We changed banks, removed my parents as emergency contacts, and updated all our legal documents. Next, we secured our personal information. We changed passwords, updated privacy settings on social media, and asked friends to be discreet about sharing details of our lives. We spoke with James's principal about the situation, who was supportive, and promised to disregard any anonymous complaints without evidence. The hardest part was preparing emotionally for potential estrangement. Dr. Jensen helped us process the grief that comes with setting boundaries, acknowledging that my family might choose to cut ties rather than respect our decisions. "Remember," she told me, "you're not rejecting them. You're inviting them to have a healthier relationship with you. How they respond is their choice." With our plan in place, I wrote a letter to my family. Not an email or a text, but a physical letter they couldn't interrupt or argue with. I spent days drafting it, making sure it was firm, but not accusatory, clear, but not cruel. In the letter, I explained that while I loved them deeply, I could not allow them to control my reproductive choices or any other aspect of my adult life. I outlined what a healthy relationship would look like moving forward: mutual respect, acceptance of differences, and no ultimatums. I made it clear that James and I would proceed with our wedding and family planning as we saw fit, and they were welcome to be part of our lives if they could respect our boundaries. I concluded with an invitation to meet with Dr. Jensen for a family session if they were willing to work on building a healthier relationship. After mailing the letter, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. The ball was in their court now. I had no idea how they would respond, but for the first time in months, I felt true to myself. While waiting for their response, James and I focused on building our support network. We connected with his family, who had been respectfully distant during the conflict, but were eager to support us. His parents, particularly his mother, Catherine, became a source of comfort and guidance. "Family should lift you up, not tear you down," Catherine told me during a long phone call. "We're here for you both, whatever happens with your parents." We also reconnected with friends we had neglected during the family drama. Many were surprised to learn what we had been going through and offered their unwavering support. My colleague Sarah, in particular, became a close confidant, sharing her own experiences with family boundary issues. Most importantly, we strengthened our relationship with each other. The crisis had strained our bond, but working through it together ultimately made us stronger. We reaffirmed our commitment to each other and to the family we hope to create. A family based on love and respect, not control and fear. A week after sending the letter, my mother called. Her voice was tearful, but calmer than I had heard in months. "Your father is still processing," she said, which I understood to mean he was angry. "But I'd like to talk to you, just us." We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but there was something different about her demeanor, a straightness to her shoulders I hadn't seen before. "I read your letter multiple times," she began, "and I've been doing a lot of thinking about my own choices about what happened with the baby I didn't have." She took a shaky breath. "I don't want you to live with the same regrets I have. I don't want you to look back 20 years from now and wish you had stood up for yourself." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, a small crack in the family facade. "Would you consider meeting with the therapist you mentioned?" she asked hesitantly. "Not with your father yet, just me." That first meeting between my mother and Dr. Jensen was the beginning of a slow but meaningful change. Mom started her own therapy journey, gradually finding her voice after decades of submission. She wasn't ready to openly defy my father, but she began making small, independent choices and supporting mine in subtle ways. My sister's reactions were mixed. Stephanie was initially furious, seeing my boundary setting as a rejection of the family system that she had fully embraced. But over time, as she witnessed the changes in our mother, seeds of doubt began to grow in her mind. Natalie surprised me by reaching out privately. "I admire what you're doing," she confessed during a secret lunch meeting. "I've never had the courage to question anything." My father's response was exactly what I had expected: anger, denial, and attempts to reassert control. He refused therapy, declared my letter disrespectful nonsense, and maintained that I was being manipulated by James and modern ideas about family. But with my new boundaries firmly in place, his tactics no longer worked. When he threatened to disown me, I accepted that as a possible outcome rather than a catastrophe. When he tried to turn family members against me, I didn't engage in the drama. When he attempted to interfere with our wedding plans, we simply made new ones without telling him. The wedding itself became a symbol of our independence. We scrapped our original plans for a large family affair and instead designed a celebration that truly reflected us. We chose a small, intimate ceremony at a botanical garden with only our closest friends and supportive family members. My mother came sitting quietly in the front row, her presence a silent act of courage. Natalie came too, though she told our father she was spending the weekend with friends. Stephanie didn't attend, but sent a small gift and a note that said simply, "I hope you find happiness." My father's absence was both painful and liberating. As I walked myself down the aisle toward James, a deliberate choice to symbolize giving myself freely to the marriage, I felt a bittersweet mixture of loss and freedom. But when I reached James and saw the love and pride in his eyes, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. We were beginning our life together on our terms, free from manipulation and control. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful about the future. We were writing our own story now. The journey of healing began in earnest after our wedding. With the immediate crisis behind us, I could finally process the emotional damage of the past year. There were days when grief overwhelmed me. Grief for the family relationships I had lost, for the childhood memories now tainted by the understanding of control that had always been present. Dr. Jensen helped me work through these feelings, explaining that grief is a natural part of setting boundaries. "You're mourning the relationship you wished you had," she said, "not the unhealthy one you're leaving behind." James supported me through the dark days with unwavering patience. He never complained when I needed to talk through the same painful events repeatedly, never rushed my healing process. His steady presence was my anchor when waves of doubt threatened to pull me under. The therapy sessions were challenging but transformative. I learned that the guilt I felt wasn't my burden to carry. It was a tool my family had used to control me. I discovered patterns of thought instilled since childhood that made me vulnerable to manipulation. Most importantly, I began to trust my own judgment again. Boundaries aren't walls, Dr. Jensen often reminded me. They're bridges to healthier relationships. Some people won't want to cross those bridges, but that's their choice. Slowly, I rebuilt my sense of self-worth independent of my family's approval. I reconnected with passions and interests I had suppressed to avoid conflict. I started painting again, something my father had dismissed as a waste of time when I was younger. I joined a book club, making new friends outside my family's sphere of influence. 6 months after our wedding, James and I decided we were ready to try for a baby. This time, there was no fear or anxiety clouding our decision, only joy and anticipation. We didn't announce our plans to anyone, choosing to keep this intimate journey private. When I saw the positive pregnancy test 3 months later, the emotions that flooded through me were untainted by fear. I showed James with hands shaking from excitement, not anxiety. His face lit up with pure happiness as he lifted me in a gentle embrace, both of us laughing and crying at the miracle we had created together. We savored the news privately for several weeks before sharing it with others. James's family was ecstatic, his mother immediately offering support without attempting to take over. Our friends celebrated with us, respecting our boundaries while showing genuine excitement. Telling my family was more complicated. I decided to tell my mother first, meeting her for coffee at what had become our regular spot. Her reaction surprised me. Instead of the anxious fretting I expected, tears of genuine joy filled her eyes. "I'm so happy for you," she said, reaching for my hand. "And I promise I will only be as involved as you want me to be." That simple statement, acknowledging my right to determine her role in my child's life, showed how far she had come in her own journey. My mother asked permission before sharing the news with my sisters, another small but significant recognition of my boundaries. Natalie responded with warm congratulations and no judgment. Stephanie's response was more reserved, but not hostile, progress in its own way. My father's reaction when he eventually heard through family channels was predictably complex. He sent a formal card with a substantial check enclosed, his way of asserting his role as provider while avoiding direct communication. I returned the check with a note thanking him for his congratulations, but explaining we were financially secure. As my pregnancy progressed, I was surprised to find my relationship with my mother deepening in unexpected ways. Free from my father's constant oversight, she began sharing stories about her own pregnancies and early motherhood, the joys as well as the challenges. For perhaps the first time, we connected as two women, not just as mother and daughter. "I wish I had stood up for myself the way you have," she confessed one afternoon as we sorted through baby clothes. "I let others make my choices for too long." "It's never too late to start," I told her, seeing how she straightened slightly at my words. The birth of our daughter Emma was the most profound experience of my life. After 20 hours of labor with James supporting me through every contraction, our perfect little girl entered the world with a strong cry that seemed to announce her presence on her own terms. Holding her for the first time, I made a silent promise she would grow up in a home where her voice was heard, her choices respected, her independence encouraged. The cycle of control that had damaged generations of my family would end with me. The early days of motherhood were both magical and exhausting. James and I navigated the sleepless nights and constant learning curve together, supporting each other through the challenges. We made mistakes, of course, but we addressed them with honesty and compassion, creating a family environment built on trust rather than control. My mother visited regularly, always calling before coming over, and respecting our parenting choices, even when they differed from what she would have done. She delighted in her granddaughter without attempting to take over, finding a healthy balance that enriched all our lives. The most unexpected development came 3 months after Emma's birth, when my father asked to meet his granddaughter. I agreed to a short visit in a neutral location, setting clear parameters beforehand. To my surprise, he adhered to every boundary I had established. Watching my father hold Emma with uncharacteristic gentleness, something shifted in my understanding of him. I saw not just the controlling patriarch, but a man shaped by his own upbringing and limitations, now facing the consequence of his choices. A distance from his family he had never intended to create. This realization didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me release some of the anger I had carried. I could now see him as a flawed human rather than an all-powerful figure, which paradoxically made it easier to maintain healthy boundaries. Over the next 2 years, our family dynamics continued to evolve. My mother began asserting herself in small but significant ways, occasionally disagreeing with my father openly, something unheard of in their earlier marriage. She started volunteering at a women's shelter, developing an identity beyond wife and mother. Stephanie, witnessing these changes, began questioning aspects of her own tightly controlled life. During a rare sisters-only lunch, she confessed, "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had stood up for myself the way you did." "It's never too late," I told her, echoing my words to our mother. Natalie made the most dramatic change, moving out of our parents' home into her own apartment and enrolling in graduate school, dreams she had suppressed for years. "You showed me it was possible to make my own choices," she told me. My father remained the most resistant to change, but even he made small concessions. He no longer issued ultimatums, learning that they only resulted in further estrangement. He occasionally asked about Emma rather than making assumptions. These were tiny steps, but significant given his rigid personality. 3 years after that fateful dinner where my family declared I needed their permission to have children, James and I discovered I was pregnant with our second child, a decision we made joyfully and independently. This time, sharing the news with my family was straightforward. I simply announced it during a family gathering, accepting congratulations without anxiety or fear. My father's only comment was, "I hope you're taking good care of yourself," which, coming from him, was remarkably restrained. The journey hasn't been easy. There are still difficult moments, disagreements, and occasional boundary violations that need to be addressed. The damage of generations cannot be undone in a few years. But we have created a new foundation, one built on respect rather than control. What I've learned through this experience is that true love never demands control. It respects autonomy, celebrates independence, and supports without suffocating. Real family bonds are strengthened by freedom, not weakened by it. Establishing boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for healthy relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our families is to teach them how to love us properly, even when that lesson is painful for everyone involved. I still don't have a perfect relationship with my family, and I probably never will. But I have something better, an authentic relationship based on reality rather than compliance. I have the freedom to make my own choices and the strength to defend them. Most importantly, I'm breaking a cycle that has damaged generations of women in my family. When my daughter Emma looks at me with her trusting eyes, I know she will grow up with a model of strength rather than submission. When she eventually faces her own life decisions, she will do so knowing her body and life belong to her alone. The journey of standing up to family control is ongoing. I'm still learning, still healing, still finding my voice, but I no longer question whether I made the right choice in defending my autonomy. The joy I feel when I look at my family, the one James and I created on our terms, confirms it every day. If you're facing similar struggles with controlling family members, remember that you deserve to make your own choices. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for your well-being. The path won't be easy, but the freedom on the other side is worth every difficult step. I would love to hear your thoughts on family boundaries. Have you ever had to stand up to controlling relatives? How did you handle it? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe if my story resonated with you. Thank you for listening to my journey from control to freedom. Remember, the most important permission you need in life is your own.